Hey y'all, welcome to Peyton Energetics. I'm Peyton, and in today's video, we're going to talk a little bit about something that I know has been on almost all of our minds in the spiritual community, and that is the timing of ascension. Now, this is something that several commenters have asked me to address, so I'm going to share with you what the Pleiadians have told me, because as you can imagine, the answer is not as short and sweet as we would like it to be. Because if you're like me, I just want them to tell me it's next Tuesday at 10 a.m. But of course, as everything goes in the spiritual world, as we start to get more multidimensional, we start to realize nothing is ever that black and white. So what I'm going to do today is share with you what the guides have told me and how they have been coaching me to align with the answer to this question that I want to see happen. Now, in order to understand what the guides are going to share with you today, it's really helpful if you will go back and watch the video I did a couple months ago on timelines. And I will link that in the box below, because what they're talking about requires us to understand a couple of things. So as you know, as we move into multidimensional thinking and being, things get much more complicated than we were used to when we were in 3D. Because when we were in 3D, there was one answer for everyone. It was black and white, and it always had a past, a present, and a future. But as we are now moving well into the upper fourth dimensional energies, some of us are playing quite a bit in fifth dimensional energies, things get much more flexible. So understanding what I said in that video about time and timelines is going to help you understand what the Pleiadians are talking about today. So check that out if you missed it, or it's a good idea to refresh yourself on it so you don't get lost. So there are a couple things to understand before we get to what the Pleiadians have been saying anytime I ask them this question about timing. Because let's face it, we have all heard our spiritual teachers telling us that this heaven on earth is happening in our lifetime, and we just want to get on with it. I know I do. And I have heard so many people estimating when it is going to happen. Many of those timelines have come and gone. And so I asked the Pleiadians to share their thoughts on this. So a couple things that we need to understand anytime we ask the guides about time. First off, we are asking beings that exist outside linear time. Because remember, as former 3D humans, we are the only ones that operate in linear time. The rest of the galaxy does not. So when we try to ask beings that operate outside of linear time for an answer in linear time, as you can imagine, things get tricky. So that is one thing that we have to keep in mind. Now, another thing that it is important to keep in mind is there is not a single timeline. This is super, super important because our human minds want to look around at our world and think that we are all on the same bus. We are not. There are, as the Pleiadians point out, infinite timelines. So what does that mean? There's not one answer to anything. Critical for us to remember this, because our human minds will default to thinking in linear time and thinking that there is one answer for everyone. So super important. There is not. There are infinite timelines. So very, very important to keep that in mind for this conversation. And finally, the other thing the guides like to point out whenever we humans ask them about timing is that it totally depends on us, because all we have to do is shift our frequency and we shift to another timeline with another end result. So keep that in mind when we talk about the advice that the Pleiadians have for us, is that every time we as a human make a different decision, every time we change our frequency or release a limiting belief, we put ourselves on a completely different timeline. So already you can see how this becomes much more complex than our human minds were initially thinking it was going to be. And then finally, the other thing that is really important to keep in mind whenever we ask the guides either to predict something that's going to happen or a question about time is they are reading probabilities. So remember, nothing is ever set in stone. Everything exists and is done right now, this second. So they are reading probabilities. And again, as soon as the human collective or us individually make a different decision, the whole answer changes. So very important to keep in mind that this is a very complex thing that we are trying to get an answer to, and especially when we consider the fact that there are infinite timelines. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the guides have shared with me, and they also have shared some suggestions for the awakened community to help us manifest ascension more quickly. Because as they say, it is all in your hands. This is an individual process. No one can do this but you. So interestingly, over the past 2 or 3 years, anytime I ask the Pleiadians about the timing of ascension, my guides in particular are very reluctant to ever make future predictions or to give dates, because they say humans are changing their mind much too quickly. So the answer changes very quickly. So generally when I have asked them about timing, they have told me soon. And soon covers a lot of territory, because our historical documents have used the word soon to mean something happening thousands of years from now. So whenever I hear that word, I take it with a grain of salt. But now, recently, when I have been asking them to update us on the timing of ascension, and in particular, I was asking why a number of people that I was watching on social media were making very specific predictions over the past year and a half or so that things were going to happen imminently, like any moment. And of course, those predictions have come and gone. But it made me ask the question of the guides, because this information was coming from somewhere. So when I have recently asked the Pleiadians about timing, how can we take more creative control over this as an awakened community, speed this up, manifest this in our reality more rapidly, what they have now been telling me is it is done. And that is new. That is something they have not ever told me before. So what they are talking about when they say this is that they are reminding us that everything is already done. Because as we know, as we move into multidimensional thinking, all is now. There is only the now moment. There is no past. There is no future. So as the Pleiadians like to remind us, you're not waiting for anything, because there is no time. There is no linear time. Everything is done now and available to you now. You just have to match the frequency of it. So they wanted to help the awakened community kind of get out of this mindset that we tend to be in, where we are waiting for something outside of us to happen. Because again, as long as we are waiting for something, aware that it hasn't happened, we stay in the frequency that it hasn't happened. So one thing that the Pleiadians have been encouraging us to do as light workers and starseeds is practice as often as we can, using our imagination, it already being done, because it is. We are just separated from it by our frequency. Now, something else that they have had to say about this is to remind us that this event that we are waiting on, and most of us have been told by our spiritual teachers that it will take the form of a solar event, a solar flash, a solar flare, which will deactivate the 3D matrix, which is the hologram that keeps us in third and fourth dimension and separated from the rest of the galaxy by basically an artificial suppression of our frequency. Most of the guides have said that it will be a solar flash that takes that offline, which causes what we think of in the spiritual community as our ascension, our final movement into full fifth dimension. So when we think about that, what the guides want us to understand is we are not waiting for something outside of us to happen. We are waiting to achieve the frequency of this from inside of us. They say this is an individual process. You ascend when you are ready to ascend. And they also like to remind us that we can ascend at any point. This is an individual process. And so basically, when you ascend is up to you. When is your frequency, your belief at the point that you are ready to move into fifth dimension? So this is not something that we are waiting on that is outside of ourselves, because as the guides like to remind us, you are the only one in your reality. So when you think about that, the ascension can only be driven by you, created by you. So they want to get us out of this victim mentality that we are waiting on everyone else to wake up. That's not true. You create it for yourself. And we also get into victim mentality a little bit when we think that we are waiting for something to happen. We're waiting for the sun to do something. And what the guides are saying is, there is no waiting. That is linear time that we are defaulting to. So they're encouraging us to remember that we are the ones creating this. So examining our belief system. When do you believe this is going to happen? Because as they have been saying recently, a lot of light workers and starseeds have belief systems around ascension that they don't realize they have. And one of the reasons for this is we have been taking in so much information through social media, through the spiritual teachers that we follow, who have been floating various diverse opinions on when this whole thing is happening. And we have, without realizing it, formed belief systems around what we are hearing. So the Pleiadians have been encouraging us, if we are interested in ascending rapidly, to examine our belief systems. Because if you are someone who has been listening to teachers who say this is going to happen in 20 years, and you buy into that, guess what happens? You align yourself with the timeline where it happens in 20 years. Not because that's the truth, but because that is what you have made your truth. Likewise, if you are someone who fully believes that this has already happened, it is just a matter of time, you are done, you are ready, guess what? You align with a much faster ascension timeline. So one of the things that the Pleiadians say is the part of the answer to this question is, what is your belief system here? So asking yourself, what do I honestly believe about the timing of ascension is very, very important, because you may get an answer that surprises you, because so many of us have just, without realizing it, taken in the opinions of other people. And that can serve you. It can put you in the mindset that all is good, all is done, it is here now, which is a very different timeline than if you are listening to someone who says it may happen in our lifetime, or maybe it won't. What is your belief? Your belief determines your timeline, which determines the answer to the question for you. Because what happens as you examine your belief system around this is you move to a collective that shares your opinion. So what happens then is you put yourself on a timeline with other people who share what you believe. And so what they're reminding us is this is an individual process. Your beliefs will determine the answer to the question. So one thing that the guides have been saying is you can ignore what anyone is telling you about the timing of ascension because you create this. This is your creation. And it's your beliefs that are going to determine what you create. Now, one thing that the guides have pointed out is that some people are going to move faster than others. And again, what this shows you is the different timelines. So what does your belief system tell you? Are you someone who doubts whether this is going to happen at all? If so, that belief is going to change the timeline you're on. So first and foremost, check in with your belief system. You may be believing something that you don't realize you've bought into just because you're hearing other people announce that version of events, that version of reality. But it's always up to you whether you buy into that. Do you like that answer? If so, buy into it. If that's not what you want, if you don't want to wait 20 years for ascension, choose another story. Align with another timeline. Because as the Pleiadians have said, you can ascend in the next instant if that's what you are ready for. That is how intensely personal this ascension process is. So again, it's going to come down to, what is your frequency? Are you holding yourself in a fifth dimensional frequency? And what is your belief system? Because everything runs through those filters that we hold. And the other thing the Pleiadians have been saying about this that they wanted us to understand as we dig into this question about timing of ascension is that everything is here and now. And all barriers between realities and dimensions are actually illusions of the mind. So the only thing that is keeping us out of 5D right now is our mind. But that's what they are reminding us. Everything is an illusion of the mind. 3D is an illusion of the mind. So as soon as you can get out of your belief systems, you get out of the limitations on your consciousness, like 3D. So again, it is very personal. It is all a question of how quickly can you transcend the mind, your belief that you are trapped in this hellhole, or however you view 3D. Most of us probably think of something along those lines. So this is all based on you and what are your beliefs and what is your frequency. Now, the guides have given us a couple tips and pointers to help us align with a quicker timeline. So if you are someone who wants to see Ascension happen now, as opposed to waiting for 20 years, they have some suggestions for how we can align with that. First, they always encourage us to process, meaning integrate, release, heal any doubt and disappointment we are holding. Because one of the things that kills our creative powers faster than anything is the human template of doubting our abilities. And this is something that is so heavy in the spiritual community because so many of us have been trying to create things for so long and not seen it happen. And what happens, we start to create belief systems and start to doubt our ability to manifest. So this is a very heavy frequency that we want to get out of our energy field. So processing any fear energy, any doubt, any disappointment is extremely important, because if you are doubting whether this is ever going to happen, guess what? That's what you create. So process those dense energies, just asking yourself very honestly, do you have doubt around this? Are you disappointed that it has taken so long, or that estimates and predictions have come and gone without anything happening? Because most of us don't realize it, but we are carrying a very heavy energy of doubting that this is even going to happen. So examine that within yourself. And the more you can integrate that energy and release it, the more you'll raise your vibration to a quicker timeline. The second tip they had for us is to practice seeing it done. So living in your imagination as much as possible and removing your attention from the circus we see around us in the world right now. Very different timelines. So if you are someone who is matching your energy just by focusing on all the shiny toys of the 3D world, what is going wrong, what hasn't happened, guess what? You're aligning with slower timelines. So if you start to shift your focus to your imagination, where you are practicing every day, what would the world look like when we move into this heaven on earth that has been prophesied by all of our spiritual teachers, practices, modalities? How would that feel? What would that look like? What is the world going to feel like when you move there? Because as you practice it being done, guess what? You match the energy of it. And all of this is frequency. That's the only thing separating us from ascending this moment, is frequency. So living in your imagination is one of the top recommendations of the Pleiadians to move onto a quicker timeline. And finally, the other thing that they encourage us to do, which is another one of those traps that can be so easy for us to fall into, is to not push against where we are. Because if we are looking around at the world, seeing that heaven on earth has not materialized yet, and getting discouraged about that, getting upset about that, getting in resistance about that, what happens is we are pushing against. We are in resistance. And remember, even the world that we see around us now is our creation. It couldn't be in our reality if we had not created it. So when we push against it from the ego, we are pushing against ourselves. And we can't ascend if we're doing that. So what we have to do is bring that old invention, our old creation of the 3D world, back into our heart and integrate it. Love it, accept it as our creation, our energy and purify that energy to release the negative programming so that we can create what we want to create from it. So those are a few tips from the Pleiadians for how to speed up your ascension timeline, or more accurately, how to align with a quicker timeline. And again, the only thing that is separating us from ascending right now is our frequency and our beliefs. So double check those beliefs. You probably have a number of beliefs around this subject that you don't even realize you have. And as soon as you clear those, as soon as you process those and start to live in your imagination, practice what you want to create, you switch to a different timeline, to a collective that will ascend at a different, earlier time. So that is what the Pleiadians had for us on the question of ascension timing. It's a complex question, as you can now imagine, and the answer is not the same for everyone. That's something that is so hard for us to come to terms with as humans, that there is a different answer for each of us. And it is totally based on what is your belief and what is your frequency. So I hope this helped you. I'll see you soon. Bye.